shining in the midst of the darkness, shining. Jesus, light of the world, shine upon us. Set us free by the truth you now bring us. Shine on me, shine on me. Shine, Jesus, shine. Fill this land with the Father's glory. Blaze, Spirit, blaze. Set our hearts on fire. Flow, river, flow. Flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord, and let there be light.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Meredith, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Let the Bible Speak. I will be your host for today, and today we are talking about a rather difficult topic, really. We're going to be talking about crucifixion. So go ahead and grab your Bible. Go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 23. It'll be a second before we read, but go ahead and turn there if you've got a Bible in front of you. And as we talk about crucifixion, I wanted to give you a little bit of background because, this is probably the most, or at least one of the most important aspects of Christianity and the Christian faith, of Christian history. It's just so important for so many reasons, and I want us to understand as much about it as possible going into it. So I think it helps us comprehend and understand what's going on a little better once we do that. So a little bit of background on the practice of crucifixion. First of all, historical background. This is a practice that we know at the very, or maybe it was earlier than this, but the first known instance of crucifixion was practiced by the Assyrians. They were the first known to practice it in some way, shape, or form. And then the Persians, this would have been somewhere around the 6th century BC, we know that they practiced crucifixion more systematically. It was something that they did on a regular basis, and they kind of altered the process a little bit. Later on, this practice was passed down to the Greeks, and that was under Alexander the Great. And then the Phoenicians ended up introducing it to Rome in the 3rd century BC. And it was practiced in the Roman Empire from that period in the 3rd century BC all the way up to the 4th century AD before it was outlawed by Emperor Constantine. Now, crucifixion was something that was a punishment for sins. It was a legal punishment. So, it was a punishment for crimes, but it was reserved typically for slaves, for disgraced soldiers, and for rebels, people who in some way, shape, or form threatened Pax Romana. They threatened the peace of the Roman Empire, right? I mean, think about slaves, for instance. If slaves began to do whatever they wanted, you could have a rebellion on your hands pretty quickly, and that would be hard to contain, hard to control, and that would be something that might threaten the stability of the Roman Empire and the powers that be. Rebels, obviously, can disrupt governmental systems, and then disgraced soldiers are among the people who are supposed to be loyal to the Roman Empire, and they are supposed to be exemplars of loyalty to the Roman Empire. So when they act up or when they show some sort of disloyalty, they punish that in force to dissuade anybody from doing anything in like mind. So the Roman Empire really utilized crucifixion as a form of control, and it was always to dissuade people from doing similar things. And the way that it dissuaded people was they made crucifixion as violent, as painful, and as humiliating as possible. So, and public, by the way, so that everybody could see it, and everybody could see, oh, I don't want to go through that. So it was really a certain measure of fear that was instilled into these controlled territories where they knew that if they started to do anything that threatened the empire, they might pay the price, and in a drastic, painful way. So one good example of this actually is has a bit of a reference in Acts chapter 5, believe it or not. There was a man named Judas of Galilee. We have his name mentioned in Acts chapter 5 as somebody who led a failed rebellion. Josephus, the historian, also talks about this rebellion of Judas of Galilee, how he urged people not to pay their taxes to the Roman government because he didn't think the Israelites ought to be oppressed by this puppet government. And in doing so, as punishment, the Roman government took his two sons, James and Simon, and crucified them, executed them by crucifixion in 46 AD. Right? So that's one really good example of somebody being crucified because they, in some way, are threatening the peace of Rome. Now, as I mentioned, it's intended to be as painful and humiliating as possible, and this is the way it would typically go. At the very beginning, the criminal, the accused, would be forced to carry a crossbeam to their place of execution. This crossbeam would typically weigh around 140 pounds, so this wasn't necessarily easy, particularly for people who had probably been awake for several nights in a row and had been tortured just constantly for the last few days. So they were already weakened, and now they were having to carry or even sometimes drag, as it was tied to them, this crossbeam to their place of execution. When they arrived there at the place of execution, they were stripped of all of their clothing. Remember, the goal is maximum humiliation. And then there were nails that were driven through the middle of their wrists, actually. Here, if I can show you there. So it was typically driven through the middle of their wrists. And the reason for this, most people, when they think about crucifixion, think about the hand, nails driven through the hand. And if that was done, typically the body would not be able, or the hand would not be able to support the weight of the body. It would tear, it would rip, it wouldn't hold. But they figured out if they do it through the wrist, it's able to support the weight, and if they do it in a precise spot, it keeps the person from bleeding out, which allows them to stay alive longer, which allows them to experience more suffering, right? So that's the reasoning behind this, and you might say, well, yeah, but Alex, look at the gospel accounts. It said that the nails were driven through his hand. Well, the Greek word for hand, care, it's actually a word that it can mean just the hand, but it can also easily be used to mean this whole region of the hand and the wrist, right? So perfectly reasonable to induct that that's what was happening to Jesus. So nails were driven through. The feet were then placed on a footrest that was called a sedile, and the legs would be slightly bent to where people hanging on the cross actually had a little bit of leverage with their feet to be able to push up. Now, the reasoning for this is because when people were crucified, the biggest physical constraint on them actually was breathing. It was very hard to breathe. If you could not push up with your body and extend your torso, you cannot extend your diaphragm properly. I kind of understand this, so forgive me if I am messing up a few of the terms for those of you who know this well. But if I understand correctly, you cannot expand your diaphragm to exhale if you cannot straighten out your torso. And so they would actually nail the feet to this footrest in order to allow the crucified person to push up in order to exhale, again, to keep them alive longer and prolong the suffering, right? Maximum suffering, maximum humiliation. Now, every single exhale required the victim, the crucified, to push up right against that cross beam, or right against that beam that's running along their back that was often very splintered. So they are, every single breath is excruciating. And eventually, the crucified would run totally out of energy, and they would no longer be able to push up. And that's why the most common form of death on the cross is actually asphyxiation or heart-related problems due to a lack of oxygen. Now, you may be asking, why in the world did I go into all that detail to tell you all the gruesome things related to crucifixion? I want us to understand how terrible this was, and how humiliating it was, and how defeating it must have been to see somebody hanging on one, right? Nobody expected to see the Son of God hanging on one. I'll tell you that. Once Jesus entered Jerusalem, events progressed rather quickly. We know that he went to the temple where he threw out the money changers. He had one final Passover celebration with his disciples. This is often referred to as the Last Supper. We have the betrayal of Judas, going to the high priest, receiving a sum of money to reveal Jesus' location and allow a good private opportunity to arrest him without public uprising and chaos. So he was arrested. He appears before Pilate, then he appears before Herod because Pilate doesn't want anything to do with him. Then he appears before Pilate again because Herod doesn't want anything to do with him. And basically every time he was tossed between these two, between Pilate and Herod, they didn't find any problem. They didn't understand really why he was arrested. They certainly didn't understand why the Jewish people wanted to punish him. Because in their eyes, for Pilate and Herod, this was purely a religious matter. This was a matter of, from the Jewish perspective, Jesus was blaspheming and he needed to be punished for that. And there was no political basis for any sort of legal punishment. So normally crucifixion would have been out of the picture, but what ended up happening is these crowds became so loud and so vicious. They cried out famously that one time, "Crucify him, crucify him." And I think Pilate was afraid that if he didn't appease the Jews, there was going to be a riot on his hands. And we talked before about the peace of the Roman Empire and how they wanted to maintain that peace so badly. Empires are fragile, right? And if you have something where you've got this large group of people rising up with the potential to maybe overthrow or even just disrupt government systems, that can be a really big threat. So Pilate, in an effort to appease the Jews, really, crucified Jesus, sent him away to his crucifixion, to his death. And this is where we arrive at Luke chapter 23. And we're going to read, starting in verse 26, we're going to read through verse 49. A bit of a long section, but bear with me here and read along if you've got a Bible open with you. Starting in verse 26, "And as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of women, who were mourning and lamenting for him. But turning to them, Jesus said, 'Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do these things when the wood is green, what will happen when it's dry?' 2 others, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments, and the people stood by, watching. But the rulers scoffed at him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him, This is the King of the Jews. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us. But the other rebuked him, saying, Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we, indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And having said this, he breathed his last. Now when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, "Certainly this man was innocent." And all the crowds that had assembled for this spectacle, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breasts. And all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance watching these things. Wow. There are a few interesting details I want to point out here in that section that we just read. The first thing I want to mention is in verse 26, we see this man, Simon, who I think more literally than anybody else in the gospel story really demonstrated what it looks like to be a disciple. Remember, just a few chapters earlier, Jesus had said, if anyone would come after me, he must pick up his cross, deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. Well, Simon was forced to do it, but here you have him following behind Jesus, carrying this cross to a place full of death. I mean, how much more of a model can you get, right? We also have Jesus, passing by these women, and the women are lamenting what's happening to him. And he says, "Don't weep for me. It's going to be bad for you," right? He's referencing Jerusalem's coming suffering. This is in verses 28 through 31. And all of this, we actually mentioned this last week, all of this would come to be reality in about 70 AD when you have this Jewish rebellion rising up against the Romans, and the Romans respond in force and destroy Jerusalem again, destroy the temple again, right? So Jerusalem was going to experience some very grave things as a result of their rejection of Jesus. And then in verses 32 and 33, we see these two other people who were crucified alongside Jesus. Now what's interesting here is that they are referred to as criminals, right? It uses the word criminals. These are people who have broken the law. Jesus is never called a criminal. In fact, if you look at verse 41, one of them is explaining to the other, look, we deserve to be here, but Jesus, he didn't do anything. He is innocent. Now his innocence is really important. It's really important. We'll revisit that idea in a minute. Then in verse 34, this famous line spoken by Jesus, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." What would you be saying if you were up there crucified for no reason? Probably some pretty bad things, right? At least some pretty unhappy things, some things maybe said in anger, right? I mean, typically people who were persecuted in this manner were cursing at the Roman guards, all of this. But instead, Jesus, in contrast to that expectation, he prays for his enemies. He loves them. He cares for them. That's exactly why he's here and not breaking out of his bonds, as he definitely had the power to do, right? I think about that song. He could have called 10,000 angels, but he didn't, because of his love for us. He was literally practicing what he preached, loving and praying for his enemies. He was given this sour wine in verse 36, we're told. Now, contrary to popular belief, this was actually intended to strengthen Jesus, again, to prolong his suffering. It was a mixture made of water, egg, and vinegar, and it was intended to prolong his suffering. But eventually, we see in verse 46, Jesus' body can handle no more, and Jesus dies. So Jesus is dead. Jesus, the Son of God, is dead. And, I see that final verse 49. His acquaintances and the women who came with him from Galilee, all these people who traveled so far expecting some sort of big event to happen at Jerusalem. And then for all of that to end in crucifixion. I mean, there really must have been some sense of, what? This isn't how this is supposed to go. I mean, maybe people wondered, had God been defeated? What's up with it? I mean, what's happening? right? There must have been some extreme confusion, and this is, I think, why you have the disciples for days afterwards just sitting around not knowing what to do, right? They're just sad and confused. And it may have appeared that God lost. Now think about it. Think about mythology for a second, if you will. I think about Zeus. Zeus, he defeated the Titans and dethroned his father Cronus, Baal or Baal. He seized the divine kingship from Yam, the sea god. The reason I bring those up is because typically throughout the course of history, when people have thought about divinity, you don't think about the cross. Nobody thinks about divinity and thinks about the cross, at least not up to that point. You think about divinity and you think about a throne, you think about power, you think about victory, you think about a crown of jewels. Nobody thought about divinity, about God, or this idea of God, and thought about a crown of thorns. Nobody thought about a cross. Certainly not a cross. Because how could God die such a humiliating way that signals defeat in every way? And if you think about it, the cross, at least initially, it does seem rather peculiar. It does seem a bit odd. It does seem rather unfitting for the creator of the universe. But here's the thing. God allowed it to happen. Jesus allowed it to happen to himself. It's not that he couldn't do anything. It's that he didn't, to accomplish a greater goal. I think about a passage in 1 Corinthians 8 or 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Maybe you're familiar with this. Just one verse here. 1 Corinthians 1 verse 18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Right? So what difference did Jesus' death make? Well, we're going to look at a couple of ideas here, and I'm going to categorize these ideas under the category of atonement theories. Maybe you've heard that phrase before, atonement theory. Really, atonement theories are just different ways of describing the same event. They're different perspectives on the same event, namely Jesus' crucifixion, which enacted some sort of atonement, which we'll talk about in a minute. Now, the first atonement theory that I want to talk about, and this is really a description of how Jesus' death impacted the world. The first theory is Christus Victor, Christ the Victor from the Latin. And this is a very oversimplified version of this, but the essence of this idea, of this atonement theory, is that Satan, in this effort to defeat God, to defeat light, to defeat goodness, he decided what better way to do that than to kill God's Son, to kill God in the flesh. And so he schemed through people like Judas to make this happen. But to everybody's surprise, Jesus let it happen. And when Jesus died, two things happened. For one thing, he conquered death in the resurrection, right? So death ended up being conquered. Satan didn't expect that. The second thing that happened is that in Jesus' crucifixion, he actually conquered sin because he was an innocent sufferer. And that's what leads me to this talk about another atonement theory, which is called substitutionary atonement. Now, I've got very little time to describe this, but I'll do so through a series of logical statements. Okay, so here it goes. The first statement is that sin begets death. Sin leads to death. This is what we see all the way back in the Garden of Eden, right? Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. On the day that you eat of this fruit from this tree, you shall surely die. The consequence of sin is death. Romans 6:23 repeats the same idea. The wages of sin is death. And then the next proposition is that everybody has sinned, right? Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And because all have sinned, and because sin begets death, everybody deserves death as a result of their sin. Now, Jesus, he didn't sin. Remember, he was innocent. He didn't deserve to be crucified. He didn't deserve death. So, in doing so, in dying when he didn't deserve it, he actually, by the grace of God, was able to take on our punishment. right? He died so that we don't have to. He died as physical death. We will also die a physical death, but then that death will be overcome. And then we will not die again. And we will not face the consequences of our sins ultimately, because Jesus died this death that was undeserved. And we enter into this transaction where we allow Jesus to be, as 1 John chapter 2, verse 2 calls him, a propitiation, right? A substitute. He has taken our place on the altar, right? Where he pays off this debt that we owed. And this transaction is entered into through baptism. That's what we're told in Romans chapter 6, verse 3. So the question really comes down to, in the end, who are you allowing to pay for your sin? Are you going to end up paying for it? Or through baptism and through living this life of faith, are you going to allow Jesus to pay the price for your sin? There are some other passages that are relevant to this discussion. I'll just name them. You can read them on your own time. We don't have time right now. 1 Peter chapter 2, 22 through 24, Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3, John chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. These are all relevant to the discussion. So the cross may have appeared to be this period of defeat. It wasn't. It was all a part of God's plan of salvation. In fact, if you go and look at Isaiah chapter 53 and read the first 12 verses or so, you can see all of the things within the crucifixion narrative that line up with that prophecy, and you see that this was actually part of God's plan. I want to finish by reading to you a few sections of a poem written in the 8th century AD. I think it gives an interesting perspective on the cross. The poem is titled, Dream of the Rood. The young warrior stripped himself then. That was God Almighty, strong and firm of purpose. He climbed up onto the high gallows, magnificent in the sight of many. Then he wished to redeem mankind. I quaked when the warrior embraced me, yet I dared not bow to the ground, collapse to earthly regions. But I had to stand there firm. The rood was reared. I heaved the mighty king, the Lord of heaven. I dared not topple or reel. Many vicious deeds have I endured on that hill. I saw the God of hosts racked in agony. Christ was upon the cross. He redeemed us and gave us life, a heavenly home. Hope was renewed with buds and with bliss for those suffered the burning. The sun was victory fast upon his journey, powerful and able when he came with his multitudes, the army of souls, into the realm of God, to where his homeland was. And that's where he wants to take us. If you want to find out more, feel free to contact us. Please participate in our Bible correspondence course. It's up on your screen now. Let us know if you want to participate in that course or if you need a Bible. Contact information is up there on the screen, the Marquette Church of Christ. And you can find a lot of this information on letthebiblespeak.net. Feel free to send us a message on there or look up more info. We're very glad that you joined us here on the show this morning. Thank you for allowing us into your homes. God bless.
Glory blaze, Spirit blaze, set our hearts on fire. Flow, river flow, flood the nations with grace and mercy. Send forth your word, Lord.